In previous Critical Thoughts, I've spoken a lot about modern retro design and where I think developers should go and take it. But for today's topic, I'm going to discuss this a little bit more and put into words what should be your goal if you're trying to make a modern retro game and succeed in today's market. I'm not going to tell you what that is in the stinger. I mean, what kind of big shot YouTuber would I be? As we've spoken about, modern retro gameplay has become one of the major aspects of indie development. It provides a very well-tested and very successful formula for developers and newcomers alike. It is a genre or genres that have been proven, and it is a great way to kind of start your game dev career. Just about any indie developer out there has probably thought or has tested making a platformer or an old school RPG or what we're talking about today with boomer shooters. But there is a very stark difference between the games that have succeeded, are Shovel Knights, Celeste, Dusks, and so on, and the vast majority of games that have come, went, and we never really hear all that much about. And the difference between this is very hard, I think, for a lot of developers to understand. There is a huge difference in quality as well as what we get out of a retro game, depending upon what year we're talking about in terms of that platform. A lot of people assume that all NES games looked alike, or all PlayStation 1 games were similar, and so on. But there is a noticeable difference when we talk about games for the NES, for instance, that were released in 1985 versus 1995, even into 96, I believe, that the NES was still having games being released for it. As a platform is developed or as it's being worked on, people will learn more about it and will be able to make use of it in very interesting and different ways. This is why we see this huge difference in terms of the quality of games released year one for a platform and year 3, 4, 5, how many years a platform goes. And when it comes to making a modern retro game, what you need to think about isn't just making a game to look and emulate that particular feel. Because the problem with that is, well, the market for games released in 1986, 1995, well, that's come and went. An audience that is only interested in playing those specific games is a very niche one. What you want to do is think about a modern retro game in two respects. First is that you shouldn't be making a modern retro game at the start of a console cycle. You want to think about this as the most highly advanced version of that platform. What would a NES game look like being developed in 1996 or 1997? What about a PlayStation 1 game released in 2003, 2004? One of the things that we see from a lot of the modern retro games that immediately don't work is that they look and play worse than those games that were originally released on those platforms. Again, if I'm playing a game that's supposed to be a PlayStation 1 style game, I don't want to play one that's maybe 10 FPS, with the screen being very jerky as it's moving and it causes a lot of eye strain. Likewise, if I'm trying to play a NES game, there is a huge difference between pixel art, and again, that is its own topic that we can certainly rant and rave about. But if your pixel-driven game doesn't have any kind of style or aesthetic to it, and it looks worse than a NES game released in 1986, 1987, that's not where you want to go. And you can do strong aesthetics in pixel art. Look at something like, I think it's called The Last Door, from the developers of Blasphemous, their first big hit. That game is just a bunch of pixel blocks, and yet still managed to present an element of dread and atmosphere of a great Lovecraftian story of cosmic horror in pixel blocks. But the second point, and this is something I think is very important to understand for any developers watching, when you are trying to approach making a modern retro game today, you shouldn't be thinking about releasing a NES game in 1986, 1995, or even 1997. You should be thinking about what it would be like to make a NES game in 2022, whatever year you're watching this video. And that sounds kind of weird when I put it like that, but there's an easy way to explain this. When we look at successes in the Modern Retro field today, they look and play very much like the platforms that they were meant to be on. But they will always feature some element of a convenience or an element of today, using, let's say, a modern version or a modern element of checkpoints, having more approachability or accessibility features. It's a game that is not hampered by the problems and technical limitations of its respective platform. A really good example of this is when I spoke with a developer, I believe it was Nox Arcanum. This was a game that was meant to be an RPG built on the Apple II platform. And I interviewed the developer about this several years ago, and he said something that was really good. He wanted to make a game that could look, feel, and play just like a game that was released on the Apple II. If it was on the Apple II, or at least back in the 90s, you wouldn't bat an eye at this game. But he also wanted to make sure that if someone never touched an Apple II, has never even heard of what that is, and wanted to play a game, this game could still work for them. And he also tried to think about, what if games are still being developed for that platform after its shelf life was done? What could somebody do with it? Could there be further advances that people didn't think about? And this is what you want to do when it comes to making a modern retro game. You want to think very simply, how do we go beyond this? It's not about just making another Mario clone or another Blaster Master or Ninja Gaiden. But think to yourself, what is the next step? What could someone do if they go further in this respect? And when we see these games that do that, they oftentimes are some of the best successes. Dusk, that pretty much kicked off this whole boomer shooter craze that we're in right now, once again has that look and feel of a 90s FPS. But with interesting level designs, new weapons, it feels like very much an elevated take on that. The same goes for something like Ultra Kill. Or if we're talking about with platformers, stuff like Odalis or Shovel Knight, and even Celeste, that they're not being hampered or hamstrung by the platform that they're trying to emulate. And more importantly, they're not emulating the bad stuff of that platform. Again, you should not be making a modern retro game and having frame loss or having your game stutter just to emulate that platform. That's not what you want to do. So, to wrap things up for our critical thought, when you're trying to build a modern retro game, one, you want to look at the evolution of a platform. Look beyond what the game that you're trying to make or the game you're inspired by. And also, see where you can go further than it. Again, no one wants to play the 50th version of a Super Mario Bros. Game, or a Secret of Mana, or whatever. But they would like to see if someone could do something more than that, to try and improve on that formula. And I know that may sound a little crazy. You know, Super Mario World being one of the best games of all time, how do I make it better? But it's not always about making things automatically better, about doing them in a different way, shape, or form. If you are inspired by Super Mario World, what could your inspiration lead to? Could it be another 2D platformer? Could it even be a first-person shooter about spin jumping all around? Look for ways to do something different. Because again, if all you're trying to do is copy another game, that's not really going to sell in this market. And if you can't even do it equal to that same game, people are not going to check it out. And it makes it that much harder of a sale. So with that said, for those of you watching, can you think of other modern retro games that I didn't talk about that went above and beyond their respective genres or their respective inspirations? Stuff like the games from Loco Malito, as an example. Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my design books. They are available wherever books are sold. Be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games.